Joining us now to discuss the president's address to Congress last night is Vance Ginn, an economist and former chief economist at the Office of Management and Budget. Good morning, Vance. Good to have you with us. Plenty to look at in terms of fiscal policy in last night's speech, but let's start with tax cuts and the budget deficit. President Trump promised across-the-board tax cuts. Now, given the size of his proposed tax reduction, how do you assess the potential impact on the federal budget deficit?
Well, it's a pleasure to be with you, and I thought there was a lot of inspirational pieces of last night's speech by the president. I mean, coming out hard with America's back and looking at ways that will help to provide more economic growth. I think extending and making permanent the Trump tax cuts should be priority number one, not only of the president, but of Congress. And I think with the one big, beautiful bill, as President Trump has mentioned, I think will be a path to do that. I was also happy to see last night that, he talked about balancing the budget. And there's a lot of it's going to be tough to do, but that's a big part of bringing America back. We have $36 trillion in national debt. We're swimming in debt across the country, and it's something that we've got to look forward to bring America back.
And a large part of his plan is, of course, tariffs. He emphasized tariffs last night as a central part of his trade policy, including tariffs on goods from Canada, Mexico, China, all in the spotlight right now. How might these tariffs affect U.S. inflation in the short and long term, and what role do they play in balancing the trade deficit?
Yeah, it's something that the president has been pretty, he's been all about tariffs for a long time. He even talked about, that tariffs are part of the soul of America. It's interesting, though, because when you look back at the tariffs that happened in the first Trump administration, we really didn't see much of a change in the trade deficit. In fact, it continued to increase. And so it'll be interesting to see what happens this time around, because ordinarily what you see happen is when you raise tariffs, it also appreciates the value of the dollar. And then that doesn't change any of the dynamics of international exchange. I think that there's also a lot of uncertainty that brings about taxing Americans more through tariffs. And we've seen that in the stock market in the last few days continue to drop like a rock. And so, I think maybe bringing them to the table, other countries to the table, the negotiating table, if you will, could be good. But I think overall, this is raising taxes on Americans and hurting Americans. And by the way, it will likely be a major drag on any economic growth that we get from the deregulation, the tax cuts, and government spending cuts that the president has talked about. So I would urge him not to go down this route of extending and making tariffs larger and more costly for Americans.
Okay, turning now to efficiency measures. Of course, those have also been high on the president's agenda, and he'd certainly highlighted significant savings from government efficiency measures, including reductions in waste and fraud last night. Given your background at the OMB, how realistic are these savings in practice, and where do you see the most room for improvement in federal spending?
I think these are extraordinary opportunity to do something big. I mean, when you look at the DOGE, Department of Government Efficiency, Elon Musk was there last night at the speech. And so when you look at all these things that they're pointing out right now, a big part of understanding you have a problem is exposing or identifying and noting that you have a problem, saying you have a problem. And that's what I think the DOGE has been doing a great job of pointing out all these areas that we're spending money on. And the question is why? What are the constitutional roles of these expenditures? And I just think a lot of them are not there and should be cut. The DOGE and the executive branch do have some power in the sense of not spending or ending contracts. We've also seen a number of federal employees resign or be fired so far. And so those are ways to slow down the growth of spending over time. But ultimately, to your point, we're going to have Congress get involved with this and start to rein in spending by changing laws. They ultimately have the power of the purse. And so as my time at Trump's first White House at Office of Management and Budget, we found $4.6 trillion in savings over a decade in the president's last budget. But it's difficult to get those things done because you need Congress to also fall in line. So hopefully with this message last night of we need spending restraint, we got to get rid of this fraud, waste, fraud, and abuse, and other spending that's just wrecking the economy of America, that hopefully Congress can now get involved and hopefully do something to pass laws that will rein in government spending.
So there's Congress. There must be other challenges also in terms of reining in and balancing the budget. What would likely need to be cut or restructured in order to reach that goal?
Well, I mean, you hit the nail on the head where you have about 2/3 of the budgets coming from Social Security and Medicare. And there's been a lot of talk that those are off the table. So if those are off the table, then you've got to look at Medicaid. I think there are some good reforms that could happen with Medicaid, making block grants to the states and allow them to have flexibility of what they want to do with their own programs to bring care back to healthcare instead of having a government top-down approach. And then they also need to look at the Department of Defense. I mean, at the end of the day, I don't think we should have any sacred cows in the budget, because if we do, meaning they're left off the table, then we're never going to get control over this excessive amount of government spending and running $2 trillion a year in deficits. And so it'll be interesting to see what happens here. But I'm hopeful in the sense of what the Doge is doing, what the president is saying now. I mean, if you look at the first term, President Trump didn't talk much about cutting government spending or balancing the budget. It just wasn't a big part of his thinking. But now, given the economic and the fiscal situation that we're in, it's got to be at the top. And so I'm glad to see that part. So hopefully we'll get more on this very soon.
Certainly. Thank you so much for spending some time with us early this morning, Vance. Good to see you again, as always. Vance Ginn, president of Ginn Economic Consulting.
Thank you.